Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Callista Solon, and you're watching NLC Trans. Tonight I'm here with my dear friends and co-hosts, Tara Alexander and Renee Benoit. And we have two very special guests tonight. We have Beth Hamilton. I butchered that, didn't I? Beth Hamilton and Anna Dorkazi. And you are with CONSEX, which is the Connecticut Sexual Assault Connecticut Sexual Assault Service Center?
Crisis Services.
I always get that screwed up. Anyway, maybe you could tell our audience a little bit about exactly what it is you guys do. I mean, I think we can sort of figure it out, but if you could kind of give us an overview of what CONSEX does.
Sure. CONSEX is the sort of umbrella organization for the 9 rape crisis programs in Connecticut. Basically, no matter what town you live in Connecticut, there's a rape crisis center that covers your geographic area. And CONSEX is sort of the statewide office that does the public policy, the statewide training. We do some of the funding for the local rape crisis centers. So they really do the bulk of the work when it comes to direct services, when it comes to community outreach. And really our mission is to support them, to educate folks on the statewide level, to do public policy work. What am I missing?
You got most of it. We do, obviously, as Anna said, too, a lot of training. So we work with a lot of statewide organizations and entities like the Department of Justice or Department of, CSSD, all sorts of different folks. The police department do a lot of their trainings, all that sort of stuff. So we do a lot of different trainings on the statewide level also.
Wow. So you actually get out there in the field and train people, and do you have like traveling symposiums or anything like that? I think I saw something. There was going to be something at Conn College.
We run the Connecticut a consortium basically of colleges. So there's 8 colleges and universities that are in Connecticut. We're always sort of recruiting more of them. Mm-hmm. And that might have been one of the things that you saw is that we have sort of revolving meetings that happen at them. The Connecticut College Consortium Against Sexual Assault. So that might have been one of the things that was at Conn College. But a lot of the colleges also independently, so there are a lot of campus advocates, some of which come from our programs and some of which work from the women's centers and that kind of stuff on campus that do sexual assault work on all of the campuses, at least all of the primary campuses in Connecticut.
Another interesting thing that CONSEX does that is actually fairly unique, both within the state and then nationwide, is we have a dedicated group of victim advocates who work with sex offenders. Well, they don't work with sex offenders. They work on behalf of victims and survivors of sexual violence whose offenders are coming into probation or parole. And it's a really unique program because there's sort of an assumption a lot of times that, your offender's been convicted, your process is over, you don't need support, you had a happy ending in the end. But what we've found is that it's an awful experience for a lot of people to know that their offender's coming back into the community and to have the onus to be on the survivor to when's my offender getting out? How do I find resources about that? Our advocates are there to support folks from that process and to provide information and to really act as the voice of victims and survivors within sex offender treatment units because it's not really a safe spot for victims to represent themselves. Sure. So we have this group of advocates who attend these supervision groups and really ensure that the victim's perspective is represented in a space that's really intimidating and unsafe and triggering for survivors. So that's something that's really unique. It's a program that we've had a lot of success with that I think has meant a lot to the community.
Sure. That's something I hadn't really thought much about, but sure, sex offenders get out. That's got to be a really scary thing. The whole thing really is scary. The sexual assault is a terribly scary thing. It's something that we've sort of all had to come to terms with a little bit as far as our own safety, and certainly a lot of us have been victims at one time or other. I can speak for myself and say that I was, in fact, at one time in my life a victim. But it's very, very scary, and honestly, it's something that you don't really think about until it happens. And it's sort of once it happens, then obviously you have to start looking for help. And so I'm sure that you guys have you have a website. that people can go to, and I think I in fact pulled up some of your information, some of your links. There was a whole lot of stuff on there.
Yeah, and actually this is probably a good time to mention, sorry to interrupt, is that we do have a 24/7 free confidential hotline, because as you mentioned, it is a topic that's impacted so many people, and it's a topic that's difficult to talk about, and because we as a society don't enjoy the conversation, there it is, right on the screen. We do have a free confidential hotline, 1-888-999-5545 is the English hotline. And then we're also unique in that we're the only state in the country that has a statewide Spanish hotline as well. So the number for that is also up on the screen, 888-568-8332. Those services are completely free. If you call from anywhere in Connecticut, as long as you use a landline, your call will be routed to whatever rape crisis center is closest to you. And you can speak to a trained certified advocate or volunteer from that program. They can listen, they can talk with you, they can give you information about local services, support groups, trainings, anything going on sort of in your geographic area. So it's a great resource. And it's really sort of a first point of contact with a lot of people who reach out for services.
And we also do, another thing that's important that all the centers do is that they do advocacy throughout different processes. So one of the first points of contact for us is often when somebody goes to the hospital and they're calling a police officer and they're calling one of our advocates basically from the program or a SANE nurse to do the actual forensic kit. So another thing that we do is, as Anna said, sort of walking through the legal process, is we make sure that folks have accompaniment and education advocacy through the criminal justice process as well as the medical process that sort of generally tend to follow sexual assaults.
And that's very, very scary stuff. I think it's one of those things that's almost being victimized twice. By the time the police, the criminal justice system gets through with you. And I actually was looking a little bit at your website, and certainly, it's one of those things I haven't really. Well, I've thought about it a little bit, but I probably haven't thought about some of this stuff as much as I should. And there was a lot of very interesting information in there as far as what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be not be doing. And I guess the question I wanted to ask you is certainly we know that there are a lot of sexual assaults. It's a very, very common thing. I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but I know it happens a lot, and certainly it isn't just women either, which is always a kind of a surprise. But
the thing that tends to get commonly overlooked is it's something like 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
You hear that number, but then there's also a really low number for boys.
About 1 in 6 tends to be what we agree on.
Yeah, and there's so much stigma around sexual violence in general in our society, and then you hear a lot of conversation and see a lot of images about what it means to be a man or what to be manly in society. And I think that just creates this extra barrier for particularly young boys and adult men who experience sexual violence, where, I can't tell anybody about this because this isn't, being a victim is not manly, it's not powerful, it's the opposite of everything my society has taught me to be. When the reality is anyone can be a victim of sexual violence. And as Beth said, statistics aren't incredibly reliable in this area because, again, it's a subject that people don't talk about, so it's hard to say, this thing nobody's talking about, exactly this many people are assaulted. But approximately 1 in 6 boys.
Wow.
It's actually interesting if you look at different communities. So definitely the LGBT or the queer community is very vulnerable. People with disabilities are very vulnerable. There are certain pockets also within basically our society where folks are particularly vulnerable for any kind of violence, so domestic violence, sexual violence, caretaker violence, that kind of stuff. So we tend to see sort of layer on top of layer of folks being more and more and more at risk at certain points. And
with people who have disabilities, the numbers are staggering. It's horrible to think that anyone in our community is being assaulted, but I've read studies that indicate upwards of 80% of people of women with disabilities, and probably a comparable percentage of men, will experience some form of sexual violence at some point in their life. And
You have to figure that's abuse layered upon abuse or layered upon abuse.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a matter of, who as a society do we marginalize? Who, does sort of the dominant culture push to the margins? And then once people are at the margins, offenders know that. Offenders understand, who are the police going to believe? Who's an ideal victim? Who has access to medical systems and legal systems? And
sure.
And with people with disabilities, that's something you see that offenders say, that's a community who I can target because who will believe them? Who are they going to call? What don't they have access to?
Right, exactly, an easy mark.
Do you find at times that the victims have a hard time coming out to your organization?
I think that the interesting thing around victimhood in general is that folks that have experienced victimhood, like in the larger society, so folks who have had really poor interactions with the medical field, with doctors, with police officers, with that kind of stuff, are much less likely to sort of trust us or to trust anybody going forward, which, obviously probably all of us in this room have experienced that at some point. So I think that there is some sort of barrier, but the really great thing about us, as Anna sort of laid out in the beginning, is that at the very least, you can sort of have this anonymous contact with us, which a lot of folks sort of do participate in, because that's a really easy way to sort of, you don't have to look at us, you don't have to, you can certainly do that also if you want to, but you can sort of have this nameless person that actually has some expertise and some ability to sort of help you talk through some of that. So I absolutely think there are many folks that will never access our services because of all those sort of layers of their experiences, but I think a lot do.
Yeah, and it's hard for us, as people who care so much about this work and so much about reaching people who want to be having these conversations and to expand the conversation. So it's a conversation the community is having. It's difficult for us, knowing how well-intentioned we are, to also think of ourselves as a system, but we absolutely are. That we have our own hierarchies, we have our own sort of biases in the way that we go about things, and as much as we try to be very conscious